computation. So I guess for each of you, how important is it to you to stay true to what we know about natural computation?
Okay, I'll start.
I
see natural computation, as something that can inspire us in coming up with engineering models. So we can learn all sorts of things about how people do things, and they will suggest how we might do things. So for example, I think taking a system with millions of parameters and training it from scratch and hoping that it would do anything sensible, you wouldn't have believed that unless you knew the brain did something. But the details...
Jeff, we don't hear well.
You don't hear me well?
You need to hold it.
Okay.
Do you hear me well now? Okay, so I think the brain inspires us, suggests things. In particular, it suggested that progressively adapting weights using lots of data would allow systems to perform complicated computations without any programming. And that idea is fairly bizarre. I mean, you wouldn't have believed it unless there'd been an example of things that did that.
Good. Other guys?
Yeah. I mean, clearly it's an inspiration. So things like convolutional nets are obviously inspired by classic work in neuroscience. A lot of ideas that we use now have their equivalent in computational neuroscience. Things like, divisive normalization, which is kind of a standard tool I use in neural nets, rectification, things like this. And there's a bunch of other things that we discover. People, a few years ago, in various places, came up with the idea that a neural net could be augmented by some associative memory. And then, you look at the brain and say, well, that looks like a hippocampus kind of thing. It's not really precise, but clearly there is, some parallel. There's like the almost cliche analogy between, AI and aviation, where, we get inspiration from birds, but we build things that don't flap wings and don't have feathers, so it's a bit of the same thing. But ultimately, I think many of us got into this field because we wanted to understand human intelligence.
So let me add something. I agree with all of these things, obviously. So my drive has been that there's what I would call an amazing hypothesis that a few simple principles could explain a lot of what is going on in the brain. Of course, the brain is also a bag of tricks, but there are a few simple principles that allow us to do these very complicated general tasks. And if we do research in machine learning and AI, we can test some of these principles, and that can give ideas to our friends on the brain side of things. And so, in a way, we can have a jointly beneficial exploration where we uncover these simple principles that both help build intelligent machines and understand how the brain works and what is intelligence.
Cool. Okay, so another thing is that I noticed, and several people in the audience noticed, I think that you each alluded to some aspects of representation and reasoning that I guess some classical AI people would embrace and call part of their toolkit. Things like compositionality, standing for, learning latent representations, sparsity, factoring, and so on. And yet, sometimes some of you speak a little disparagingly, I think, of possibly the symbolic AI world. So, can we be friends or can we not?
Well, we've got a long history, right? So, the last time I submitted a paper to AAAI, it got the worst review I ever got. And it was mean. It said, Hinton has been working on this idea for 7 years and nobody's interested. Time to move on. Now, the idea was the idea that you might represent the meaning of a word with a vector. And it takes a while to sort of overcome that. And we should be sort of, right now, we're in a position where we should just say, let's forget the past. And let's see if we can take the idea of doing gradient descent in a great big system of parameters, and let's see if we can take that idea, because that's really all we've discovered so far. That really works. The fact that that works is amazing. And let's see if we can learn to do reasoning like that.
I'm gonna get answers from those guys, but let me suggest that just because AAAI was mean to you once, or maybe several times, that's not a way to go, right? We should do induction on that and just be mean all the
I
time.
completely agree with you. I'm just trying to explain why there has been
Yes.
some slight animosity.
So, I mean, my answer is very similar. In fact, I had it in my conclusions, like, replace symbols by vectors and logic by continuous functions. And the reason for this is because we want to make reasoning compatible with learning. And the only learning that we know works is gradient-based learning, so we have to make it compatible with gradient-based learning. So we have to make things differentiable, and I don't know how to do this precisely. I know that the very idea of this is anathema or shock or whatever to people who are really interested in logic, because you're going to have to abandon a lot of the body of work that sort of came out. And a similar phenomena occurred a few years ago with sort of transformers and other similar models in NLP, where a lot of linguistic knowledge is basically not very useful anymore for those.
It's all being said. As you also heard from my talk, I think we should look forward and think about the best ways to get, at the same time, the advantages of deep learning and solve some of the problems, like reasoning and I think language understanding and so on, which are associated with classically with symbols, but I think can be also addressed using more modern approaches. And I think attention mechanisms in particular are a key to this, as I was trying to convince people of.
So, do you really think that there are no useful alternatives to gradient-based learning?
Well, okay. So all the learning methods that people have ever come up with that have worked are based on optimization of some kind, right?
Random forests?
Huh?
Random forests?
It's some sort of optimization. So, I mean, it's greedy, but
Okay.
yes, okay. And there is, marginalization with Bayesian and stuff like that. I mean, you can qualify this, but to some extent that's the case. If there are other methods than that, I'd be interested in knowing what it is. That actually raises the question, does the brain minimize an objective function? Not clear. Okay, second thing, if you're going to optimize a function, what are you going to optimize it with? Either it's zeroth order, gradient free, or first order with gradient, or higher order, we still use gradient, but use other things. Zeroth order is way less efficient than first order, so if you can use a gradient, please do it. In fact, there are methods in reinforcement learning for which the objective is not differentiable, that use a critic whose purpose is to make the objective function differentiable by approximating it by a differentiable function. So, yeah, gradient design works.
That's actually the question, but yeah. Okay. So maybe we should go to some of the questions that are a little bit more about methodology and such things. So one thing that I think so there are a lot of students in the audience, and so there are a lot of kind of student-related questions that have come up. One concern I think that a lot of students have is that it seems like that there's a lot of research right now that's going on in big companies that have enormous resources. And the question is, well, what is the role of universities when Facebook and Google and so on can mount these enormous projects that it feels like a student can't compete with?
Can I take that one? So I still think that the really original ideas come from a graduate student in a really good department getting good advice so he doesn't repeat history, or she doesn't repeat history, but spending several years thinking about how to do something. And that can be done in a big company, but I think the place where it's done most is in universities. I think that's what universities are really good at.
So I can add something to this. There are a lot of really hard problems in AI which can be studied under the microscope of the toy problems. I mean, I think we have turned our back on toy problems too quickly in this field, and in machine learning especially, focusing on like these really hard benchmarks that take 2 weeks to run with 2,000 GPUs. But there are really interesting problems where you can analyze a question, you can do experiments with reasonable resources. Now, I admit that sometimes it's frustrating not to have those resources, but there are also environmental issues related to using that much energy.
So I propose that we create a new conference, the International Conference on Deep Learning on Toy Problems.
Can you repeat that actually? Deep learning
On toy problems.
on Twitter.
Actually, this relates to my suggestion to Jan some years ago. I wanted to have a conference called MNIPS, where your algorithm had to be tested on MNIST.
So I guess to continue some of this student thing, I mean, one thing that I think students are also interested in is what should they be reading and studying? And I noticed that actually you all mentioned concepts from the previous era of, say, probabilistic modeling. So, but what do you think students should read?
It's better if they don't all read the same thing, that's for sure.
I think that's actually a really important point, right? I mean, we shouldn't be a monoculture.
I had an advisor,
Uh-huh.
and his advice was reading rots the mind.
Works.
No, rots.
Rocks. Oh, okay.
So his advice was, don't read the literature, figure out how you solve the problem yourself. Once you've figured out how to solve it, then go read the literature.
I think Feynman had a similar recommendation.
Let's see. Yeah, we don't know these questions. So, okay, let me come back. So here's another kind of question I had worked in here, which is, so what is, the start of this session was good. We started with convolution, and then that's not so good. Maybe we need capsules and transformers are useful. And there's this sense that we are collectively as a field coming up with mechanisms that help break different kinds of structural biases and so on. Do you think there's going to be 6 of those, or like, are we going to have to find 60? Or is there a sense in which there's a closed set of these kinds of mechanisms that will get us to, say, human level AI?
The smaller number, the better, but we don't know.
Yeah, I'd say it would be nice if it were a small number, like say 6, 10 classes of architectures. Whether that's possible or not is not entirely clear. I mean, what gives us hope, perhaps, is the sort of apparent uniformity of the cortex. But then there is only a small proportion of our neurons in the cortex, so all the rest doesn't seem to be as kind of isotropic or uniform.
Do you have reservations about the research activities that some of the big AI companies are doing?
Yes. For example, if it's gonna help the fossil fuel industry.
No, actually, both Facebook and Google data centers are becoming carbon neutral, and will be by the end of this year, at least for Facebook. I'm not sure about Google, but
I think they ought to be doing things about fake news, but
yeah,
I should say that's just
And I would add, it'd be nice if these companies with a lot of AI expertise were not also trying to make money by building things or doing research for military applications.
I think that's something all three of us agree on, and I was actually quite impressed that Google cancelled a project that would have led to huge billions of numbers from the Defense Department because Googlers were against it. That made me feel that Google wasn't such a bad company after all.
Yeah, it doesn't do this kind of stuff.
So let's go to something mildly less controversial. So where do your old and new ideas, where do your ideas come from? How do you decide which ones to work on?
It comes in the morning when I wake up.
Okay. How do you decide which ones? All of them?
No, it's system one. No, seriously, I mean, it's intuition, right? And then, of course, you do experiments, and it fails, and it fails. Well, sometimes it works. And you have to listen to that intuition, and then that's how we do science.
Well, I mean, certainly, it's, very reliant also on intuition and things like this, but I think you have to identify the crux of the real problems, the important problems, and then ideas come and they become obvious after the fact. At least they're obvious to you. It might take 20 years for the rest of the world to realize they're obvious, but it's happened. But it's kind of that kind of progression. So I had that, I had that feeling about multi-layer neural net, way back in the 80s, that this was, kind of an obvious way forward, and then convolutional net, which was an obvious way forward. It took a long time for this to become prevalent, and now I had this feeling about self-supervised learning, about the problem of dealing with uncertainty and in prediction. So those are problems that we need, like important problems that we need to solve, rather than sort of, it's always useful to, of course, improve the, by various methods, improve the performance of practical systems, but I'm more interested in things that have a long-term impact.
So there's a recurrent kind of theme in the questions about the fact that neural networks were somewhat unpopular for a while, and some brave people continued to work on them, and whether...
Stubborn.
Stubborn. So stubborn is good. And so the question is, if you're, imagine that I'm a researcher currently attached to an idea that's wildly unpopular at the moment. How should I proceed? What should I do when people write mean reviews and nobody likes my research?
So I guess the first thing you should remember is that most ideas that are wildly unpopular because they're no good. So that's the tricky discrimination, right?
Yes.
And I don't know.
No, if it's not an ours, give up. Is that what you're saying?
No, I think you have to look at evidence, right? It can't be just your intuition. There's a fine line between taking into account the evidence and just going by faith. But you do need that faith to move forward, and maybe you fail the first time, but there's a small twist that will make it work.
I think if you really believe in an idea, you should never give up on it. That's why I'm still thinking about how to make Boltzmann machines work. I have a piece of logic that satisfies me at least. If you have logic, yes, logic. And the logic goes like this. If you believe in an idea and you have good intuitions, you should work on it. And if you have bad intuitions, it doesn't really matter what you do.
Okay, good. One thing, actually, this is a question of mine, really. So Jeff said that it was important for graduate students to think for a long time about a difficult problem. And I wonder whether you feel, I feel like the current publications cycle is fast and short-sighted, and I'm nervous about its effect on the field, and I wonder if you guys feel the same way.
I'm discouraged. the current generation of researchers in computer science, machine learning, and AI seems to be very focused on short-term gains, just working on the next conference deadline. And so, I have students coming to my office and say, what can I do the next 4 weeks? Because there's this deadline.
None of you do that, right?
And I think it's really bad for the field. That we need to change something structural that will encourage people to take more risks and work on a longer term horizon.
What can we do?
I think there's a whole spectrum, right? I mean, there is certainly a lot of usefulness in sort of getting the records on the benchmarks and everything. This is very useful in the end, so nothing wrong with that. The problem is, and as our field grows, it becomes more and more applied because there's more and more people who are interested in those applications. That's why they came to the field. So the question is, what is the total absolute number of people working on kind of more longer term, and whether they still have a voice in conferences and venues that tend to be more application oriented, like vision conferences, for example, or natural language processing conferences. So there should be a space for conferences that are more on methods and where there is no emphasis on beating records. Perhaps this newly proposed conference on deep learning for toy problems. But that may allow people to still have a high rate of publication, which is required by our system of getting jobs and stuff like that, but still while working on kind of long-term complex questions, ambitious questions.
The publication pressure is much stronger than what it was when I was a grad student. And the number of papers that students are producing in the term of their PhD is just crazy.
We would not admit ourselves in our own PhD program.
Absolutely not. The question is whether the integral of the content of the papers is different.
Yes.
It may or may not be.
And actually, one side effect is once a paper is being published, like a half-baked thing that goes into a conference paper, once it's been accepted, they move on to something else very often. And
I have a model of this process of people working on an idea for a short length of time and making a little bit of progress and then publishing a paper. It's like someone taking one of those books of hard Sudoku puzzles and going through the book and filling in a few of the easy ones on each Sudoku. And that really messes it up for everybody else.
It's 7:30. Do you want us to stop?
Maybe a question from the audience?
Okay, a couple questions from the audience. I don't know the mechanism. Oh, there's a microphone there and a microphone there. Okay. Just a microphone.
Can we call doing AI doing science?
So the question was, can we call doing AI doing science? And the answer you have to give is yes or no, and the answer is yes.
well, I think there are different things you can do in AI, and some of those are more on the side of engineering, and some are more on the side of understanding something, and then that's more on the science side.
Yeah, it's engineering science, right? So there's the creative part where you conceive an artifact, and then there's the science part where you analyze why it works and why it doesn't work and things like this. And it's very often the case in the history of science and technology that the creation of the artifact preceded the theory that explained it. A good example is the invention of the steam engine. And it took 100 years for people to figure out thermodynamics and explain the limitations of thermal engines and things like this. So we are at the stage where we can build steam engines, and the question is, where is thermodynamics? What is the equivalent of thermodynamics for intelligence? I mean, that's kind of my big scientific question.
There, at the microphone.
Thank you. Excellent talks. I have two questions. One is, I don't know if there's so many papers these days, but if any of the three of you had looked at this paper from Chalette from Google, where he's talking about not necessarily what general intelligence is, but more about ways of what it's not and ways to potentially measure it. The second question is, human beings have been able to be generally intelligent and create things like mathematics, so we can create a formula analytically like F equals ma or E equals mc squared. And the amount of computation is almost as simple as 2 times 3 equals 6. So it only takes a few transistors, maybe a few watts or milliwatts, whereas a lot of the deep learning stuff is incredibly powerful in general, but it takes megawatts or kilowatts or hundreds of watts. And so is there some possibility with these neural architectures that we don't necessarily ultimately need to have things that are so computationally complex or with so much capacity?
But you know, F equals ma came out of the brain of a person with a huge number of neurons, a huge amount of computation. And if we want to have machines that can come up with these kinds of things, even though the end product might be a simple equation, there's a lot of computation and experience and learning that was behind that.
Well, I'm not arguing that.
We're gonna, I think, I'm told that we only have time for one more question, which I'm sad about. So,
Yes.
we're gonna take that question right there, at the mic, in the middle.
Yes,
One for each mic.
it seems like you're in violent agreement on so many things. The nature of priors that might be required, the value of self-supervised or unsupervised learning. I'm wondering if amongst you on some of the finer points of these, you feel there might be disagreements or differences in how you think the approaches should be taken or what elements are important.
Well, Leslie already tried that on us and it didn't work.
Oh, I can tell you one disagreement between us. Joshua's email address ends in Quebec, and I think there should be a country code after that, and he doesn't.
I'm staying out of that debate.
Okay, I think on that note, we are done. So Vince, okay, so thanks very much to our...
And just a quick reminder, we've heard a lot about System 1, System 2, Nobel laureate and Daniel Kahneman, and somebody has put on Twitter that he is in fact in the audience tonight. And I just want to remind you of tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. we will have a fireside chat with Daniel Kahneman and some of the Turing Award winners as well. So please wake up early and be there.